The nation of Brazil is in chaos as thousands of opponents against the corrupt Lula regime storm his offices and headquarters. We're going to take a look at the latest from Brazil. We're going to see how the American legacy media, to their shame, is already trying to pin all of this on Trump and J6. And make sure to stick with me to the very end of this video when we'll find out how even members of that legacy media are admitting that the political left has no one else to blame for all of this but themselves. You're not going to want to miss this. Over the weekend, Brazil's capital erupted into chaos as opponents of their new Marxist president, Lula da Silva, stormed government buildings, inflicting damage on the presidential palace, as well as their very controversial Supreme Court, which in many ways is at the center of public outrage and distrust. As many of you know, over the last 2 months, mass demonstrations of hundreds of thousands, not millions, have been held across the nation as patriots took to the streets in defiance of last October's presidential election between the nationalist populist president Jair Bolsonaro and the highly corrupt Lula da Silva. What's so important to know here is that back in 2017, Lula was sentenced to 12 years in prison after being convicted in one of the biggest corruption scandals in Brazil's history. Now, like I said, that was back in 2017. So you might be asking, again, this is 2023, just 6 years later. So what on earth is Lula doing running for president? Did he run his campaign from jail akin to how Biden ran it from his basement? Well, this is where the corruption within Brazilian politics begins to break out for all to see. What we have to understand is that in Brazil, it's not the president that's been invested with supreme power, as it were. The president actually is rather limited in terms of his power and influence in Brazilian politics. The real power in Brazil resides in their Supreme Court. The court itself is comprised of 11 justices, and of those 11, 7 were appointed by Lula. Lula and some of his ideologically leftist ilk, like Dilma Rousseff, who took over from Lula, a few months back, to the shock of millions, without any explanation, one of the Supreme Court justices, a fellow who was appointed by Lula forces, overturned Lula's conviction, simply stating that it lacked necessary justification. Moreover, he didn't just overturn the conviction, he nullified it. It's as if Lula never served a day in jail, and that allowed him to once again run for president. So obviously, Bolsonaro supporters who are inclined towards law and order, Lula's Brazil, Lula was president for 2 terms a while back. It fell into chaos and violence. Bolsonaro, a former army captain, ran on cleaning up corruption, restoring law and order in Brazil. Well, obviously, Bolsonaro supporters smell a huge rat in all of this, and they see the whole political and judicial process as corrupt to the core. So when the runoff election came, back in late October, Lula barely squeaked by, won by 1 percentage point. So needless to say, tens of millions of Brazilian patriots don't buy it. And as you can see, they're still not buying it. The problem in Brazil is that there's no equivalent of an election oversight commission. So the people feel like they just have no recourse to challenge what the Supreme Court justice did in nullifying Lula's conviction. They have no recourse to address the perceived election irregularities. And so after months of protests this weekend, that frustration obviously boiled over. Now, there are mixed reports coming out in all of this. There are reports of some 400 arrests. There are also reports that both police and military personnel have been largely passive in the midst of this, which suggests that they're actually rather sympathetic with the protesters. Either way, I think you can guess how our shameless leftist legacy media is already framing what happened in Brazil. But we're going to find out that the joke's on them, and we're going to find out precisely why. But first, gang, I've got to admit, I don't always make the best food choices. If I'm honest with myself, there is, I mean, 0 chance that I'm eating the doctor recommended 6 cups of fruit and 6 cups of vegetables each and every single day. If only it were all in a powder form that I could put in my favorite drink. Well, what do you know? It is, and that's why I absolutely love Field of Greens. Field of Greens is powered with a full spectrum of essential vegetables and fruits, plus science-backed herbs and prebiotics. You're going to absolutely love this. Field of Greens works fast, and if you're like me, you're going to have more energy, you're going to feel healthier, your skin will look healthier, and it can even help you lose weight. Click on that link below and get your Field of Greens delivered right to your front door. And to help you get started, you're going to get 15% off your first order and another 10% off when you subscribe. But it's a limited time offer, so don't wait. Click on that link below or visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code Turley Talks. That's fieldofgreens.com. Predictably and right on schedule, the American legacy media is, of course, already comparing what happened in Brazil over the weekend to their own weaponized version of J6. It really is sad to see how pathetic these lamestream media types are, how they appear to be so totally incapable of thinking outside of their deliberately polarized frames. But that's not true of everybody within the legacy media. I came across a fascinating take by British journalist Julia Hartley-Brewer, who gets it, who actually gets it. Take a look at this.
This didn't start with Donald Trump. This did start with Hillary Clinton back in 2016, when the Democrats basically said the election had been stolen by Donald Trump and Russian interference, and she couldn't possibly have lost to Donald Trump unless something nefarious had happened. People having parades saying, "Not my president." I'm sorry, this started in 2016 in America. It also started in 2016 here in the UK, when Ramonas, not Remain voters, perfectly reasonable to have voted Remain, but Ramonas, people who did not accept that result and still try to overturn it. When people who are, want to be our next Prime Minister, hi Sir Keir Starmer and others, actually tried to overturn a legitimate referendum, fair and square, claims that it was Russians who had influenced, claimed that we were all stupid, that there'd been some sort of dodginess that had gone on, dodgy money, dodgy this, dodgy that, lies, and everything in between, that we hadn't really voted for leaving the EU because we didn't really know what we were voting for. When you make those claims in a democracy, you undermine democracy itself. We didn't have storming of Parliament by Ramonas because they thought they were going to get their way.
No, we just had an 80-seat majority.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Well, exactly. It was turned over, and what was interesting, British Brexiteers did not go to storming Parliament. They actually did it through the ballot box and waited patiently. Yeah. But I'm saying, what's happened with Trump, what happened with Bolsonaro, it didn't start. It didn't start on the right. It started on the left.
It started on the left. It started on the left. That's all we heard for 3.5 freaking years from these very legacy media types who now actually pretend to be defenders of democratic integrity. 3.5 year, 24/7 cable news. The news is tightening around Trump. Russian collusion. Bob Mueller was going to finally bring him down. These people who champion tens of millions of tax dollars wasted on a totally useless special investigation. These people who champion the impeachment of a president over a freaking phone call. These people are the gall to present themselves as the defenders of democracy, as over and against those authoritarian forces behind J6. We don't live in an age of a free press anymore. We live under a press dedicated to imposing a radical cultural Marxist ideology on the masses. The press has become a collective Walter Duranty, the Russian correspondent for the New York Times decades ago, who deliberately wrote puff pieces about Stalin. He knew they weren't true, but he was so enamored with Stalinism it didn't matter, because Stalinism was truth. Facts be damned. Obviously, we'll be keeping a very, very close eye on how things develop in Brazil. But as long as the powers that be continue to denigrate and dismiss the electoral concerns of millions, all the while enforcing their own, those powers that be will only end up, in the end, delegitimizing their own power. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button, and you'll definitely want to check out my latest video. You're not going to believe what McCarthy did to get the speakership. You're going to absolutely love it, so make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.